and as I said in chapter 15, we talked about the U Incorporated hierarchy. And what we tried to do there was to put a priority on the order in which you would start to acquire assets, because there are certain ones that you should get first and other ones you should acquire later. And so the lowest level on that hierarchy, there's 7 levels. The lowest level on that hierarchy says yourself. And what that means is that the top priority for your investment, the number one priority for you to invest in is you. You are your best asset. Now, your goal then is to make sure that anything that's necessary to maximize the potential of your best asset, you, is done. If there's some type of education, if there's some type of certification, if there's some kind of training, if there's some type of reading, if there's some type of apprenticeship, whatever it might be, that is the best money investment you can possibly make, and time as well, is putting it in yourself. We've covered that extensively in the materials in the Financial Fitness Pack. I won't go into that a lot here, but that's the first layer of the hierarchy, not because the most money is going to go in there, even though it's drawn the biggest at the bottom of the hierarchy or the pyramid shape, but because that's the most important. It's the priority. Number 1 is to invest in yourself, and it's ongoing. You do that forever. Number 2, the next one up, is what we call creating an emergency fund, where you open a separate checking account and you start sending money to it on a regular monthly basis from your income from your business or your paycheck or both, whatever combination you have of incomes, and you build up an emergency fund. And the amount that you want to build up in there is different for different people, but we recommend somewhere between 3 to 6 months of expenses, so that if something were to happen, your emergency fund would support you at your current rate of living for at least 3 to 6 months. It's just a good idea to have that. So picture this now. So as you're making money from your businesses, getting paychecks from your jobs, you're getting out of debt. And the reason you want to get out of debt is because I want to draw too many things here. That whole hierarchy is sitting on a foundation. So we've got these 7 levels in this hierarchy through which you're going to work as more and more cash flow comes in. And it's sitting on a foundation. If you have personal debt, consumer debt, you're making payments on your house, you're making payments on your cars, you're making payments on your college education that you got 21 years ago, you're making payments on your boat, your jet ski, your snowmobile, there's a hole here underneath the hierarchy. You can't build anything up on that because there's a hole. Well, there needs to be solid rock. Getting out of debt gives you a solid foundation on which we can start building your wealth, start building your lifestyle, to start stacking the assets on top of a solid foundation. Does that make sense? If we don't have you out of debt, if you have this big hole of debt, then no matter what we try to build up here, it's shaky, which is why we try to get you to fill in the hole as fast as we can. Does that make sense? So we've covered that a lot in a lot of our other materials. Tonight I want to work more toward the offense. I'm going to assume that you've gobbled up the defensive training, that you're filling in your hole, you're building solid rock to stand your hierarchy on, and then we're going to start working up through the hierarchy. Sound good? Okay, so the first level is 0th level is to get out of debt. Work defense hard, get out of debt. The first level is to invest in yourself importantly and continually. The second level is the emergency fund. The third level is what we'll call survival preparation. Now, you can weird out on this one. You can end up on a reality TV show if you go too nuts on this one. But sometimes things happen. You have to evacuate. You never know. So, having a little bit of food and water stored away, maybe some hunting rifles or something. I don't know. Don't get crazy with it. But it's a good idea to have a little bit of something prepared and stocked away in an attic or something. I don't know. So number 4 is savings. And there's 2 types of savings. Again, we've covered this a lot elsewhere. It's not my goal to go into this too much tonight. But savings, there's long-term and targeted savings. Long-term means you just make a habit of saving all the time. And I know there are people who say cash is trash and why save if interest rates are so low and inflation's so high. I get all that, but there's something about liquidity. There's something about just having some cash. There's something about just having some savings. There's something about the habit of keeping some of what you make on a regular basis and putting it somewhere you can quickly get it if you need it. So you should just always be saving long-term. But then targeted savings means that thing that you're just going to die if you can't get it. Why don't you wait a few months and see if you're still alive if you don't buy it? And save for it instead. And when you have targeted savings, you stack up enough to go pay for it in cash. That's what we mean by that. But what I really want to talk about tonight are levels 5, 6, and 7, the rest of the top of the hierarchy, where you really start to get into real investing. And this is where it gets riskier as you head higher and higher. And you start to run into things like the risk-reward concept where risk and reward go hand in hand. They work together. They're bedfellows. And generally, to go after more reward, you have to take on more risk. And once you go past level 4 of that hierarchy, there starts to be a lot of risk factors that you need to be aware of when you start to invest. And there are numerous. And I'm going to go through these risk factors a little bit, one at a time, because I think it's important to understand that as you're starting to acquire assets that kick off cash flow and you're starting to try to build systems that build your personal economy and leave a legacy and leave an inheritance, there are things that are working against it. There are headwinds against each of those intentions. And not all of these affect all investments, but all of these affect at least one investment that you might end up making. And the first one is interest rates. Interest rates have an enormous impact on a lot of the different things you're going to try to do in your life with your money. They'll actually even impact you as entrepreneurs as you build your businesses too. It has a big effect too on number 2, the second headwind against anything you're going to try to accomplish financially, and that is called inflation. And really, I should put its cousin here, deflation. But you don't generally see deflation as much as we have inflation, but I think that could possibly change. But deflation or inflation, this is money supply tampering, or those 3 knobs being turned by the Federal Reserve, particularly the first one, particularly the open market operations, affects the amount of money out there in circulation. And so inflation is the money supply tampering and its effect on prices. Inflation is when prices go up because there's more money to buy the same stuff. Deflation is when prices go down because there's less money to buy the same stuff. Now this doesn't mean things got more valuable, and it has nothing to do with supply and demand. That's a whole separate category. This is just the result of the size of the money supply fighting for the same amount of goods. Inflation is dangerous because it eats away the value of your dollar. Deflation is dangerous because it takes away the amount of dollars people have to even spend, and it kills jobs and kills productivity and all kinds of other things. So inflation is a big risk factor that affects all the investing you'll ever try to do. Number 3, and this is because as I speak, we had a nice entertaining primary debate last night. I didn't watch it, but I've heard all kinds of things about it, and I clipped through a couple news clips on it. Very interesting. Politics is a very big impactor of the economy. It has a lot to do with how things go in the economy. In election years, markets tend to get a little skittish. People get a little scared. It just leads to unrest and volatility in the markets and fear. The number 4 risk factor is economics. It's not really a risk factor, so to speak, because economics is just the study of the markets, and it's not really a risk. But the fact of economics and how it operates does impact your ability to build assets that kick off cash flow over time. What I mean by economics are the market forces and the natural concept of supply and demand. You may have dreamed your entire life of being a custom home builder. But by the time you come of age and get a little bit of money and get a pickup truck and a nail gun and you decide to start becoming a custom home builder, it might be that you enter at the worst time because the economics of home building at that time are terrible. Like in the early 90s, there were so few homes built in the United States in the early 90s. If you were coming of age as a home builder, that was a really, really bad time to do it. You would have been much better served to become a home builder in like 2002. Because you were going to get about 5.5 years of anything you built, they'd buy it for way more than it was worth. So the economics and market forces and supply and demand have a lot to do with how well you prosper financially. The next one is catastrophes. Number 5 risk factor is catastrophes. Things can be, I don't even know how to spell it, so I'll write it sloppy. Things can be clipping along just fine, and then some terrorist decides to do something, or some country decides to invade another, or whatever it might be, and those have enormous effects on markets and economies. The next one, and this is a risk factor, this is an ever-present risk factor, and it's called regulations. This is where you end up with rules and requirements and hoops to jump through and barriers erected in your path as an entrepreneur, as an investor, that you just have to be aware of, and there's no way around them. You just have to live with them. But generally, the more regulations there are, the harder it is to prosper because you're dragging all kinds of extra baggage with you. And that leads me to the next one. I bet you can guess it. Taxes. Taxes are perhaps the number one consideration when trying to figure out the best way to go about building wealth over time. Because taxes are the invisible partner that shares in none of the work and takes a big chunk of the fruits of the labor. And the more productive you are, the more taxes they get to take until you get to be ridiculously productive, and then there's all kinds of ways around them. But it's very tough for a middle-class person to fight her way out of the middle-class tax structure and get to be in a position where the supposed rich are getting away with murder on their taxes. If you look at the tax in the United States, a major portion of the taxes are paid by the top 1% income earners. The top 1% carry like 48% of the tax load or something like that. So we're talking about 0.001% are the ones who appear to be able to have all these ways to bring in lots of assets into their foundations and stuff and get away from the tax laws. But just being a high-paid surgeon or a top-performing lawyer, what I would call the upper part of the middle class, you get clobbered on your taxes. And so trying to take anything left over from your high income and turn that into long-term wealth, taxes are your biggest enemy. Number eight is just outright theft and fraud. I don't think that one needs much explanation. Number 9 is advisors. One of your riskiest things is going to be someone who supposedly is an advisor. You have to choose them carefully, very carefully, and be careful you get what you pay for and figure out how they're compensated. Some of the worst advice is free advice. But even worse than that is when you pay for it and it's bad. And so advisors are a big headwind against growing wealth. Number 10, or can be, I should say. Number 10, just outright default. This is where you've got your money tied up in something and it disappears. This happened to me in 2 of my direct investments I made. One in a trash company and another one in a manufacturing company. I was directly their financer and they both ended up going under and taking all my money with them. And I saw one of them later driving around in a Corvette, which made me feel very happy. So default is a risk for any investment where your principal can just dry up and disappear. Number 11, this is an ever-present risk factor, and it's called self. You'll be almost as big of an enemy for your finances as taxes are, because the only thing more prevalent in your story than taxes is you. The 2 things will always be there in your financial life: you and your taxes, and it'll be a close contest between which one of you will be more damaging to your overall finances. And there's several factors that play into that. Why would I even say that? Why would I be so mean to you? Some of you I haven't even met yet. We're 20 minutes into the talk and I'm offending you already. Because you're emotional. The fact that you're offended proves it. No, I'm kidding. We're all like this. We're emotional. And we make emotional, irrational decisions and we try to justify them with logic and the appearance of rationality. And but we're emotional. Our good intentions have a tendency not to stick around a long time. The second thing is that we have a short-term bias. We tend to look too short-term and make decisions based on short-term analysis instead of long-term considerations. And then the final thing, and this is what we're trying to talk about here tonight, and what our intent is through the financial fitness program, is ignorance. Lots of times we just don't know. How many can look back at stuff that you've done with your money in your life and you're like, I just didn't know. That was so dumb. I just told you 2 of mine. I could tell you more. Restaurants, for instance, just don't invest in them. Unless you're the one in the kitchen cooking and owning the plate. Don't invest in somebody else's restaurant. That was ignorant on my part. But I've paid a lot of tuition for my ignorance, and I'm trying to save you from having to pay some of those similar costs. The final risk factor, we could make a list like this that would go on and on and on, but the final risk factor is what I'm going to call liquidity. It's not really a risk factor, but liquidity means how quickly can you get your hands on the money? How quickly can you get the money that you've got invested in something back out of what that is and have it useful as money again? There's almost nothing more frustrating than trying to get your money out of an asset and you can't get it out. You can't sell it, you can't liquidate it, you can't rent it out. And you've got something tied up in there and you can't get it out. That's illiquidity. And so these are all the kind of things you have to consider as you start building up cash flow, getting out of debt, stacking up assets, and trying to get cash flow to kick in off of these assets.